Well, hello, everyone. This is episode 6 of our new online series, and let me just start with a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, Happy New Year to everyone. It's nice to be back. It's 2025, and we have a lot in store for you. So I want to remind you that the next CIO Symposium will be on May 20th of this year. We hope you will go and buy tickets. We will also have a VIP-only pre-event on May 19th, and you can be a VIP by becoming an innovator, which is a paid subscriber to our online community, and then we will expose the tickets for the pre-event to you. Um, so I just want to briefly say that we have some upcoming events, which we promised in the new year. And so today is January 14th. We are recording episode 6. It'll be released in the next couple of weeks. On January 28th, Tuesday, January 28th, Irving and I will host a open Q&A. That will only be for innovators. It will not be recorded, and it will follow Chatham House rules, which basically means you can use the information you learned, but not attribute it to anybody in the discussion. That same protocol will apply to February 14th, when we will have Mike Grandinetti come. He will do a 30-minute presentation followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. So that's what we have coming up. Those two events are just for innovators, so we do hope that you join our online community. And with that, Irving, how are you doing?
I am quite fine. I am looking forward, first of all, to 2025. I am looking forward to the 2025 MIT CIO Symposium, and I'm looking forward to doing this discussion with you since I've enjoyed the previous one so much.
Yeah, well, as far as the symposium goes, we made a little progress over the holidays with our closing speaker. Isn't that right?
We have, and one thing that I'm very happy is that ever since we came back in person after COVID, we've had 4 eminent MIT faculty members as our closing speakers. First, in 2022, we had Sandy Pentland. Second, in 2023, we had David Otter. Last year, we had Rodney Brooks. And this year, we are very happy to have Daron Acemoglu, who is a professor of economics. And in November, he was announced as a co-recipient of the 2024 Nobel Prize in Economics. So that's pretty nice, Allan, that, for the last 4 years, we've had these very eminent MIT faculty members that are closing speakers. And they stayed with us for the discussions after they finished the symposium. So it's been very nice having them.
Yeah, and so Darren just approved his title and description. He's going to be talking about the long-term economic impact of AI, which is going to be a fascinating talk, something that he has written about and we've talked about on previous episodes.
We have, and I'm sure this subject will come up in this discussion because it is discussed in the various reports we'll talk about.
Yeah, so let's just jump into today's podcast. So we're focusing today on the most recent blog post that you put up, which is basically you're writing about a report that just came out from the National Academies about AI and jobs. And the way I want to start today is I'm going to read just a little bit about the National Academy report, and then I'm going to read a little bit about a blog post from Rodney Brooks. And so for the listeners, I've put in the show notes a link to your blog, a link to the report, and a link to Rodney Brooks's post, which is very long but very interesting. Okay, So the National Academy's report says the labor market consequences of widespread AI deployment will depend both on the rate at which AI's capabilities evolve and on demographic, social, institutional, and political forces that are not technologically determined. By contrast, Rodney Brooks says, there are new tools, and they are being applied widely in science and technology and are changing the way we think about ourselves and how to make further progress. That being said, we are not on the verge of replacing or eliminating humans in either white-collar jobs or blue-collar jobs. So, here's the thing, Irving. The tone of these two statements is quite different, and I would like you to elaborate, please.
Good. But before discussing the tone about each report, let me say a few words about the nature of each of these reports. The National Academy's report is based on a formal request by the US Congress in 2022 to assess the current and future impact of AI on the US workforce. You know, that is a common thing for the national academies to do, that either a government agency or various other institutions request a panel to look at a very important issue. So they did that in 2022, and a group of 10 experts, of which, for example, David Autor, which I mentioned before, was one of them, was put together, and it was chaired by another MIT alumnus faculty, Eric Brynjolfsson, whom actually, I believe Eric was the founder of the MIT CIO Symposium when he was the head of the initiative on the digital economy. Am I correct? I think he started it a long time ago.
Well, he was definitely a very significant and early contributor to the symposium. I don't know whether he
I,
was a founding member. I have to go back. You know, we
I,
have
I,
all
I
those
believe so. It doesn't matter, but I
no,
believe so. So he has a close
something we
connection.
could research.
Yeah. Anyway, so these 10 eminent researchers worked for 3 years. That's not uncommon in a major report. And then, after they had drafts of the report, it was reviewed by another eminent group of researchers to make sure that they agreed with the conclusions, and only then was the report published. Very formal, US Congress, etc. Rodney's blog on the 2025 predictions is something he's been doing for 8 years now. Starting in 2017, he always has been writing a blog on January 1 of the following year on his predictions for for things that he's very, very interested in. And he's very interested in three things.
So, and I just want to say, he claims that he's going to continue doing this until he's 95 years
He
old.
did that. That's right. He's been doing that. And so the things he's interested in are AI and robotics, which you and I are also, self-driving cars, which you and I are also, and the last one I'm less interested in, the state of human travel. So let's put that aside. And Rodney, in his blog, not only makes predictions for, let's say, the future of AI and robotics, but then he evaluates how the predictions he made in the previous 7 years have worked out, and it's his individual opinion. So on the one hand, you have this formal report, Congress, etc., and on the other hand, you have the individual predictions of Rodney Brooks, and that makes that makes the two reports, which are each is excellent, quite a bit different. Now we can discuss the reports.
All right. So let's just elaborate on this a little bit. So
Yes.
the National Academy report, would you say that it's fair that it was created by a committee, basically, and that the committee tried to find sort of a common ground on which everyone could agree?
Listen, who the hell am I to tell you that this committee of very eminent researchers I don't agree with? First of all, I do agree with them. And their overriding finding was that AI has emerged as a really important general purpose technology. That is a technology that will have wide applicability in other areas. Alan, you and I have discussed what it means to be a historically transformative general purpose technology. We've talked about electricity. We've talked about cars. We've talked about computers. We've talked about the internet. And he puts AI in that category. They put AI. And then they said something that I found very interesting. AI stands out among general purpose technologies owing to its core attribute, a focus on intelligence. They added this arguably makes it the most general of all general purpose technologies.
So,
By the way, I couldn't agree more with their overriding conclusion.
so listen, I have great respect for the National Academy's report. It was excellent. I did my reading, as you know, people on the audience may not know that you give me reading assignments all the time. Uh, and
I share the things I read that I enjoyed a lot. That's
yes,
all I do.
yes. Well, except that if I don't read fast enough, then I get horsewhipped. But anyway, that's another
And
thing.
at my age, the readings I do keep my brain active. So I need to keep not only my
But,
physical body, but my brain going.
but my point is that the two reports are very different because you have the opinion of a single individual versus the
Right.
opinion of a committee. And I'm just curious to know if I asked an LLM to write a report on this topic, do you think it would more closely align with a group of humans writing the report? And I'm not going to pick out the national academies, I'm just saying in general. So would it be more closely aligned to a committee, or would it be more closely aligned to an individual, very opinionated and very smart individual like Rodney Brooks?
Well, remember, Rodney Brooks could have just as easily been one of the researchers in the National Academy's report.
Fair enough,
No,
but
no,
the National Academy's report could have been structured of having multiple individual opinions, but they chose uh, to.
well, because they had to advise Congress. And if you give Congress, here are 10 individual opinions, Congress would go back and say, listen, guys, get your act together.
Understood, but if you were to ask an LLM, would it look more like a committee report or a individual human report?
I think that if you ask an LLM, and I believe actually you did to test out your question for me, they would say that they were quite similar. That's the when you send me the response, they said they would be quite similar. For example, uh, I already told you the National Academy's overriding conclusion is this is a big deal, and they had 11 individual key conclusions, some of which we'll discuss, so we'll go deeper into some of them. Um, Rodney's personal assessment of the state of AI and robotics is that while there's been definitely significant progress in the last decade, he was not happy about the level of hype that's existing right now that distorts people's understanding of reality. So the hype is what bothered him so much. He agreed, as did the National Academy's report, that AI is being widely applied in science and technology. However, he added, but it's not going to replace, as some have said, humans in either white-collar jobs or blue-collar jobs. In fact, he put it in the same category that the National Academy's report says. He said, the jobs may shift, but they are not going away. That's a very similar conclusion. He
So, so,
also he
so
also added something that I think you and I heard him say when he gave the keynote last year, that breathless predictions about AI are not new. They have been made since AI became an academic discipline in the 1950s. And then he added something very interesting. The key difference this time is that in previous decades, nobody was following AI, so they didn't care about these breathless predictions that turn out to be wrong. This time, everybody's following AI, so all of a sudden, it becomes a much more important area to discuss because it's so widely discussed.
yes, well, so that's why I spend a lot of time walking in the woods, and so I don't get upset by these breathless predictions, um, Irving. But all right, so I'm going to move on to the questions about the actual report in just a second. I just want to bring out the point that I was sort of trying to draw you into, and I would claim that if I were to ask an LLM to create a report, the report would look more like that of a human committee than it would a human individual. I'll give you two anecdotes that back this up. So, you know that in December we went through a process of coming up with a draft agenda for the upcoming CIO Symposium. Uh, I had a phone call. I guess I'll just say with one of our prior panelists. I don't know if I'm allowed to name names on the podcast, but he's a very strong. He's on the board of many companies. He was a prior CIO, and he said to me, when I look at these, we want to make sure that they're punchy. In other words, make them look like they were written by humans and not AIs. So the AIs tend to homogenize the names and titles of the work. So that's one anecdote. The second anecdote is that you recall Linda Rabia, who was the motivational speaker last year. So she is an instructor for the MIT Concourse program, which is for new freshmen who come into MIT, and we try to teach these young students the value of critical thinking. And so one of the things I've been working with Linda on is how can we introduce AI into her classroom and what can we use it for? And so we've been doing some experiments, and one of the things we noticed is that if I give AI a question, it will tend to try to take all the different opinions and homogenize them into kind of it's almost like the AI is trying to be diplomatic, and it doesn't recognize that some opinions come from really top level experts, and it has trouble differentiating those. So I'm just saying when people go and read it, remember you got a human on one report and you got a committee of humans on the other.
And
And
I defend poor AI from your attacks on it. after all, the LLMs, when they gave a response, it's based on the things that it was trained on, and it may even say that the things it's trained on from most eminent people, and by eminent I mean accomplished people, it gives it greater weight. Here you have a committee of 10 incredibly accomplished individuals. What can poor LLM do other than homogenize? By the way, that's why it took 3 years to get the report out, because it had to be worked out to reflect the 10 opinions. Uh, if I may say a personal anecdote, I know this for a fact because if you remember, David Autor in 2023 gave a superb keynote, as you would have expected. And I said, David, I want to write a blog on your keynote. Have you published this anywhere? And he said, Irving, don't do anything yet because I'm part of this committee. This is in 2023, and this is part of my contribution to the committee. And I kept checking with him over the next 2 years, and he was frustrated that it was taking so long. And in fact, he actually published some of his recommendations someplace else, which I then wrote about based on that. So this is not surprising, and it's just the way things work, as opposed to Rodney, who remember, one of the things you and I loved about his keynote is he talked about the 7 deadly sins of AI. Do you remember
Oh,
that?
I know. Well, and it's in the blog post that's in the he talks about a few of the sins.
He talked about 4 of the sins in his predictions. And so he adds much more color. He adds much more personal things.
Which individual humans are wont to do.
Exactly, as opposed to LLMs.
So I'm gonna move on to some questions, but for the
Yeah.
audience, I'm gonna say now these questions were the core of them was generated by Grok, which is an AI. I wanted to see what Grok thought I should ask Irving, and so here you go, Irving. The AI is talking to
Yeah.
you now. So, given Brooks's perspective that there's going to be a slower than expected integration of AI into the daily work process, um, do you see a similar timeline with the impact on the job market? In other words, do you think the job market is going to change more gradually than perhaps uh, is outlined in the National Academy's report?
First, I totally agree on that, not just based on the report, but based on other things I've written. By the way, including some excellent recent articles by Daron Acemoglu. So I totally agree. But the National Academy's report had 11 key findings, which are very, very interesting, and they summarized them at the beginning of the report. And I would recommend, it's a long report, the National Academy's one, 140 pages, but the summary of its key findings is right up front in summary. And one of the key
And that part is only about 6 pages, as I recall.
Yeah, it's only 11 key findings, and they are relatively short in the summary. And one of their key findings is that significant further advances in AI technology are highly likely, but experts do not agree on the exact details and timing of those advances. Allan, if you remember, uh, Daron said the same thing in this MIT News uh, interview he gave that I wrote a blog about, and pretty much just about most people I respect, most people I've read agree that at the moment, it's very difficult to predict what will happen and when it will happen. Allan, again, going back to things you and I have discussed, this has been true of just about all historically transformative technologies, that their deployment in the marketplace often takes decades because you have to develop so many additional things. With electricity, yes, Edison did the electric bulb in the 1880s, but the distribution of electricity, you had to lay out wires, you had to, electrify regions. Then you had to wait for the assembly line to be developed in the 1920s, and consumer electronics like refrigerators and washing machines. That's what took all the time, not inventing the AC electricity, and then somebody who invented the DC, Tesla, right? Invented.
Tesla did the AC. It was Edison who wanted the DC.
Okay. And why did the AC win out?
Oh, because it was much better for distribution.
Okay. Okay. Very good. So AI may go faster or slower, but it will take time because there is so much to be worked out.
All right, so Irving. So in the National Academy's report, they talk about AI could displace human jobs or augment human jobs. And regardless of how long it takes us to roll out this technology, there is going to be a need from a policy
Yeah.
perspective to focus on education. So, what
Perfect.
specific policies or educational reforms do you think are going to be necessary to prepare the workforce for this shift?
Yeah. Excellent question. And if I may be a little parochial, remember, MIT had a major task force on the future of work that was led. David Autor was one of the leaders of that task force. I forget the other two. One of them we had in the in one of the early MIT symposiums that she and I had a conversation. And this has been a common uh, conclusion by the experts, that you can use technology for replacing workers, and, and then it creates unemployment and so on. But you can also use the technology to complement workers, to make them more productive. And the reason is that you use the technology to automate the parts of the occupation that are more um, routine, and that allows the workers to focus their attention and their human creativity and those parts that we don't know how to automate. And the combination of humans and technology, whether it's the internet or whether it's computers in general, is much better than the humans by themselves.
Yeah, so but what educational or policy reforms do you think we need to make in order to
Well, yes,
prepare for the
I'm about to go there. The What happens is, when all of a sudden the job now involves interacting with some new technologies, education becomes more important than ever. And we saw this with the internet, that when the internet came along, and you could offshore jobs, and you could do things because a lot, remember, um, the world is flat, talked about that. All of a sudden it increased inequality because the jobs that were replaced were the more routine jobs, but the jobs of the people who had more education, not just college, but post-high school, a trade, a, obviously a 2-year education, et cetera, they did better because now they knew how to deal with the technologies. And what the report said is that AI will help all that because AI not only has lots of information that you can use to help train people, but it may very well give you a way to distribute that knowledge. As we all know, there is a lot in AI where people can ask ChatGPT and other chatbots questions, and it will help them learn new disciplines. So AI can truly transform education.
But
And
so
can,
Irving,
can, can I add, can I add,
let's say that I'm a freshman coming to MIT. Now AI is on the scene. How can I expect my experience to be different because AI is there?
listen, a freshman coming to MIT may not be the best
Well, then
person to,
pick another example. How is the experience of K through 12
uh,
education change? And
be-
and how should it change to prepare for this new world?
and the way it should change is that the technology should be introduced to the students from the time they are in the higher grades of grammar school, let alone middle school, high school, and so on. So they are growing up learning how to do whatever they are learning, not the way it was done 50 years ago or even 30 years ago, but with the most current tools. And if people know how to do that, then you can keep using the technology to keep retraining workers. If their job changes, instead of losing their jobs, they now have mechanisms for learning how to do the next generation of their jobs with this technology. So what will happen is education will become much more available from the time one is a child throughout one's life because it is going to be so much more. eh, You can use these technologies to help in the education itself.
So, but how do we guard against unintended side effects? As a specific example, the computer revolution brought in note taking on computers. We now know that the human mind has a better memory if you take notes by hand, and so there's still a place for a written notebook as compared.
Absolutely.
Yes. So
Be-
what do you think might be the unintended side effects?
Because if we do our research right, we will take into account uh, the best knowledge about how to teach, how to use the new technologies that are not passive. You just take notes. But if you have a more advanced technology helping you, then as the teacher introduces the subject, whatever, then part of the homework for the students will be to answer questions that were individually prepared by the AI assistant to the teacher to make sure the student understands. And this kind of involvement of the technology, remember, you don't replace the teacher. The teacher is critical, but you now have assistants to the teacher, not just in high school, middle school, and so on, but even in the universities and even in worker retraining. And the more you learn how to do this right, the better you will handle this.
So,
And
Irving, I'm going to pivot slightly. So, we've talked about education, but now we have a workforce. Let's assume that we're using the AI to augment the workforce, not to replace the workforce. How do you envision the daily interactions between the human and the AI?
Look, one of the way the national academies talked about it, since it was one of the key findings, is that AI will have significant implications for education at all levels, from primary education through college, through continuing education of the workforce. It will drive the demand for education in response to shifting job requirements and the supply of education as AI provides opportunity to deliver education in new ways. Now, this is very important. This won't happen on its own. That is, we need the involvement of a combination of governments, the private sectors, and education researchers to learn how to do this the best way possible. And I think one of the problems we had when we said, oh, we'll just introduce personal computers and the students will figure out how to use it, that was not enough. They just used it to take notes or something. Or if you said, well, we'll just give everybody a smartphone, an iPhone or a Samsung phone, whatever, well, the organizations didn't also do the necessary work to help see how this can help the students best. And so the report from the national academies makes a really major point that society has to get very involved in making sure that the new technologies have the impact we wanted them to have, as opposed to, let's say, what has happened with smartphones, where, yes, it's great that every student has a computer in their pocket, but it's not great that they're using it primarily in social media, which then has all kinds of other problems. So this won't happen on its own. This will take significant work by governments and industry and so on.
So,
Very
Irving,
important message.
on that last point, I would just invite the audience to read Jonathan Haidt, who has been writing about the impact of smartphones on education and the rise of depression and a lot of other problems that it has caused.
Yeah, because you know that what we did in what we have done, and let me say in the past, but it's not, it's just the last 10, 15 years, we have the new technologies, but we just gave it to the students without uh, making sure that it had the intended purpose, and that what we learn is that's not good enough, especially when they are younger. And it's also not good enough in the use in retraining workers when their jobs change and they need to learn new skills. All that has to be taken into account, and the National Academy's report makes a very strong point of that.
All right, so I'm going to move on a little bit. Now, in your blog post, you posed four key questions and you provided partial answers in your blog post, but let's just talk about at least a few of the key questions that you brought up. So, the first one that you talk about is what expertise will be substituted with or made obsolete by AI? Now, before you answer, I just want to say, we know that there's the whole repetitive task argument. That was true when we introduced computers and automation and whatever, but I'd like you to go a little bit deeper into the specifics of how AI is going to make tasks obsolete as compared to what we've seen in the past
Yeah.
10
first
years.
of all, you gave me credit for these 4 questions. The 4 questions come from the report. I put them in the blog because I found them so
Right,
compelling.
fair enough, but they are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
If people don't want to read the report, they could go to your blog and get the 4 questions.
that's what I try to do, is at least is to highlight the part that I found most interesting so you don't have to read 140 pages. So what expertise may be made obsolete? Um, for example, uh, if let's take being a paralegal whose job it is, paralegal is a legal assistant to lawyers, and often their job is to search through lots of records, legal records that are necessary to to do their legal work. And let's say some of them are superb at searching through the records. Well, let me tell you, AI is far better at searching through gigantic amounts of information that any human can be. So all of a sudden, the paralegal skills are not just being very good at searching, but being very good at now organizing the material they get from AI to now use it in whatever legal argument they are helping to put together in the most effective question. That's the AI equivalent of, in the past, um, using technology for repetitive tasks, which is what caused uh, some unemployment to happen, because a lot of the repetitive tasks were in manufacturing or were in administrative tasks. Now the repetitive tasks are in higher up, more educated careers like paralegals, like nursing assistants, and so on. And this has been pointed out that the skills that AI could start replacing are going up the chain, are going to be skills that people who have more education have. And can they prepare for that? Absolutely. They can learn how to use AI to now do their job more effectively.
Those,
Let me give you another one that is very interesting, which is in healthcare. Doctors complain that they have to spend so much time uh, filling up a healthcare record, an EHR, electronic healthcare record, every time they see a patient. And there has been a lot of complaining, I'm sure you've read about it, that when the doctor is talking to you, he or she is looking at their laptop because they have to fill out the electronic healthcare record, and that takes time. Now, AI is becoming better at transcribing speech correctly into the record. So more and more, one of the tools that is being developed is healthcare record that put together from transcription of what the doctor is telling the patient, and it gets transcribed and it gets condensed and it gets checked. So those are two of the skills that AI
well, well,
can
Irving, I
do.
certainly don't hope the AIs don't hallucinate while they're writing those healthcare records. However, that's
No,
just a.
no, no, but but that can be, that's a very good point. You don't use the same LLM that you use to do a general question. You use a much more healthcare specific LLM that has been trained with healthcare and medical information precisely to guard against the AI making a mistake in the transcription. So I'm glad you brought that up, because
So,
very important.
So also, let me just bring up a very brief anecdote to illustrate the MIT student perspective on AI, since we're talking about education. So back when I was in high school taking chemistry exams, I used to use a slide rule. You might remember those
I
devices.
remember I had one.
Yes, well, I still have mine. And the calculator was coming along, and there was a big debate in high school about whether to allow the
Mhm.
students to use a calculator or not. And obviously, students now do, in fact, use calculators, and that was common practice by the time I went to college. But when I was speaking to Linda Rabia a week ago and talking about her students, and again, just to remind you, she deals with freshmen coming into MIT. They often in the classroom talk about, the use of LLMs to generate their report. And so what she said is the students say to her, well, the AIs are just calculators for language. So it's the exact same argument from their point of view that they view the AI as just a tool that they use, and nothing more than that. So that's the way the young people think about it.
Well, and remember, they do that now because it's so new, but my expectation is that over the next 10 years, maybe longer, we will learn which parts of teaching, let me say, MIT college students are can be replaced by technology because, as you said, it's like a calculator, and which parts are very important to develop their critical thinking, which in the end is what a good education should give you. And right now, we may not be totally sure, but a major part of a very good education is to develop critical thinking. And that has been studied because you have to make decisions that are not black and white. And you can use tools to help you make those decisions. But in the end, they are your goddamn decisions. And therefore, you need to have the critical thinking, the knowledge about how to integrate the information in making a decision. That will not change.
All
Maybe
right.
that's what Linda, by the way, told us that last year when she talked to us, the importance of critical thinking in education. And I believe, although I don't remember exactly, that she may have told us that yes, MIT students may be great in math and physics and chemistry and so on, but you will have to make lots of decisions that deal with people in your job, with colleagues you are working on, or if you become a business executive, with the people you're managing, and those requiring critical thinking in addition to technology knowledge. And she made that point. Am I correct that she said that?
Absolutely. This is what they do at the concourse program, try to teach critical thinking. They train the students on doing discussing both sides of the issue, to have debates. And in fact, that's why we brought some of the concourse people into the symposium to add some of that MIT energy to the pre-event last year.
And by
Uh,
the way, this leads to what you could have asked me, which is, well, Irving, but I hear that that's now, but with artificial general intelligence and with super intelligence, we may no longer need human critical thinking. The AI will have better critical thinking than we do.
Yes,
That
but,
is,
but Irving, the AI is not going to be able to go fly fishing, right? You are still going to need humans to toss that line and catch the trout. So I'm going to have something to do even if the AGIs come along.
There is also the empathy point that I believe Linda made. No, no, I'm being totally serious.
Just, that's fine. Well, there is the empathy point. Go ahead.
No, no, that there is a lot more to humans than just the raw knowledge. There is how to apply it in society and how to apply it when you're working with other people to get the best things done. And that's a combination of technology, of concrete knowledge, but then our brains have evolved. Remember, don't forget evolution has a lot to say here. Let's bring up Darwin into the conversation. Our brains have evolved to be really good at putting all this together if properly trained.
All right. Well, so listen, I'm going to move on to another question. I'm going to read it, but then I'm going to reframe it for you. Okay.
Please.
So the official question is, how feasible will it be for workers to acquire newly valuable expertise? But another way of asking this question would be, what's going to happen when our efforts to retrain workers fail?
Well, I hope they don't fail, but they have failed. Most of the time, let me use the analogy with the what happened like 20 years ago. The retraining of workers failed in the US because we didn't try, because we just outsourced jobs and we didn't spend the necessary effort to retrain the workers, and as a result, inequality increased. That was not the case in Germany. In Germany, because unions are much stronger there, and they work with the government and with the companies, rather than letting workers go when they no longer needed them, the government actually subsidized the companies to help retrain the workers they would have otherwise let go so that they can stay uh, they can have a job. We didn't do that. Germany did it, and our inequality was higher. I think we need to take these things into account, and AI isn't going to, AI will just be the tool for retraining, but that takes society to do this. And let me again give credit to David Autor, who's been writing about and saying this over and over, and so has Darren, that you know you need to spend the time and effort to bring people along who might lose their jobs with new technology.
Well, let's mark this moment when Irving Wladawsky-Berger holds up Germany as an exemplar of a thriving society in 2025. We'll see how that works out. Moving
In certain areas, they haven't been doing as well as we had in other areas, and we can discuss that another time. That's not my area of expertise.
I'm going to move on to the next question here. I'm just trying to mark the moment.
Okay.
Uh, so, um, so what? Well, actually, in that little quip was a good lead in to the next question in the report that AI is going to have an impact on the power dynamics between, say, organized labor and management, and how do you think that's going to play out?
Well, we already have seen that with remember the actor strike was it in 2024 that I forget the union of actors
Yeah.
uh, had a strike, and one of the things they were striking is number one, they own their images, that you cannot take their image that you use in a film and then reproduce it many, many, many times without remunerating the actor whose image you took. Remember that?
I do remember that. And as a matter of fact, I'm still waiting for my royalties on the image they
Well,
took of me.
then they may not have used it, so it's possible.
No, it's not terrible. Here I
And
thought the check was going to be rolling in.
and similarly, in addition to the actors, there was the strike of the script writers who, if you use their scripts to train an AI which could write very good scripts in the future, they also thought they need to get paid because their script is their property. And that's like intellectual property. So there are going to be a lot of very interesting discussions. And Allan, uh, the panel I led last year with two MIT graduate students, Shane Longpre and Robert Mahari, we talked about this because the two of them have been very involved in this question of the intellectual property of AI. Uh, and that's why different companies have been suing OpenAI and others for misusing their intellectual property by not paying them. Those issues are going to be adjudicated, and these are the kinds of things that take time, 5 years, 10 years, I don't know how long, but that is happening as we speak.
I
Do
hear
you
you.
agree with that answer, by the way? Because you're much more involved here since you've been.
Yeah. So the quip that I was making was related to the fact that I was an extra at one of the worst movies in history, Don't Look Up. And during that time, they
So I watched it, by the way. I think you told me about it, and I
yeah,
watched it.
you watched it. Anyway, if you want to watch a really bad movie, you can watch Don't Look Up. You can find me about an hour in, but they brought all the extras into this trailer and they had 300 cameras around us and they took an image and they do that so that when they're doing a scene, say, of Cape Canaveral with protests, they can generate a computer generated image that makes it look like a very large crowd, even though they only have maybe a few dozen extras. So there's only a very few people, but they multiply them with these images. And so
Right.
I'm
And that's
I'm still waiting for my
well,
royalty checks to come
well,
from.
by the way, this is a very serious question, and the serious answer is those are the kinds of issues that take time to work out. And I don't know how it will work out. This may very well make unions bring unions back because you need to work this out collectively. It's hard for an individual to do it by herself or himself, but this is what takes time. So when people say, oh, it may take 10, 20, 30 years, it's because of things like this, which is how the technology gets integrated into society so everybody benefits from that. And if you do it badly, you'll see backlash and you'll see all kinds of issues.
So Irving, we just hit an hour. So what I want to do is in the report and also in your blog post, you summarize the key findings of the report. I'm just going to read one of the
Go
key
ahead.
findings and then have you respond with that, and then I think we'll bring the conversation to what
Okay, go ahead.
the report says. AI will have significant implications for education at all levels, from primary education through college through
Right.
continuing education of the workforce. It will drive the demand for education in response to shifting job requirements in the supply of education as AI provides opportunities to deliver education in new ways. It may also shift what is taught to the next generation to prepare them to take full advantage of future AI tools and advances. So the floor is open. How do you see AI changing the state of education?
Okay, so first of all, I thought a lot about that. And then I started thinking that what you just asked me has been happening over the past 250 years of the Industrial Revolution. If you look at the 1800s, which was mostly agriculture and things like that, a relatively small number of people knew how to read and write because you didn't need how to read and write if you were working on a farm, taking care of animals, etc., etc. Then all of a sudden, wait another, let's say the late 19th century, all of a sudden manufacturing started going up, factories started to get developed, there was a lot of immigration, people needed those jobs. You couldn't have a job in a factory if you didn't know how to read and write. You needed to know how to follow instructions. And that's when grammar school attendance went way up. You didn't need to know how to read and write in the farm, but all of a sudden you needed to know how to do that in factories and when you were living in urban environments. And that's where public education started. We didn't have public education before that started. Then following World War II, let's say in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, just knowing how to read and write wasn't enough. You needed a high school education to have a middle class job, to be able to do the kinds of jobs that people who worked in offices, in white collar jobs, people who had more sophisticated blue collar jobs had. And all of a sudden, you needed a high school degree. Before that, you probably didn't need that. Then technologies kept advancing. And then in the 1980s, 90s, and whatever, all of a sudden, college became more important. And the number of people in the US who had either a 2-year college degree or a 4-year or more degree went way up. And by the way, women started coming into the workforce, and that was a huge part of why the jobs went way up. That if the only jobs available for women was cleaning houses, being a maid in a hotel, whatever, you didn't need all that. All of a sudden, women can do anything, and you saw the explosion. And something like this is going to happen with AI. But getting back to maybe the answer to the first question you asked me about AI, exactly what will happen and when, we don't know because we are in the early years of this happening. And by the early years, the kind of AI you and I are talking about, large language models, deep language models, and so on, are 5 to 10 years old. That's very, very new. And all of the advances here are ahead of us. Do you agree with that, or am I being too pessimistic? I don't feel I'm pessimistic. It goddamn takes time. I don't know how else to say it.
Well, Irving, I realize it takes time, but I, for one, welcome our new AI overlords as they
And you
go
should
going along.
welcome them, just like we should welcome our internet overlords without which you and I wouldn't be able to record this podcast.
There is some truth to that. All right. So I'm gonna bring this episode to a close. I want to thank everyone for joining us for episode 6 of our online series. Don't forget that later this month, Irving and I will have an open Q&A for those who are paid subscribers to our online community. You can find all of our episodes on our in our online community. Just look on the welcome page. You can also find them in Podbean. We have a separate page there, and our community manager is working on distributing these episodes on Apple and Spotify, and who knows where else she will be doing that. This is all coming in good time. So thanks a lot. That's all we have for today. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Allan.